Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story you might think you know, but trust me, the real depths are yet to be explored. Imagine yourself in a dimly lit, incense-perfumed room. The air thick with anticipation, the subtle scent of old paper, and quiet determination hanging heavy. You're not just listening, you're almost there, breathing the same air as the very first Westerners who stumbled upon a secret so profound it would ripple through generations, forever altering the landscape of consciousness. These were the secrets of 19th-century Zen masters, men and women whose quiet insights inspired a search for stillness that continues to this very day, drawing countless souls into its gentle, unyielding embrace. You'll trace the invisible threads, feel the subtle shifts, and understand how the seeds of an ancient tradition found fertile ground in a radically different world. You probably won't survive this journey unchanged. Prepare to question everything you thought you knew about where your own desire for peace truly originated. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might assume that the Western world's fascination with Zen burst forth in the mid-20th century. A sudden explosion of interest fueled by the Beat Generation and the counterculture movement. But that's only the visible tip of an iceberg, a shimmering surface reflecting a much deeper, more complex current that had been flowing for decades, largely unnoticed. To truly understand the allure of Zen, and why it struck such a resonant chord with the Western psyche, you must journey back further to the quiet, sometimes imperceptible, shifts of the 19th century. This was an era of immense change, of burgeoning industrialization, scientific advancement, and a growing unease with the perceived limitations of traditional Western thought and religion. Imagine yourself in a bustling Victorian city, the smokestacks belching, the gears grinding, the pace of life accelerating at an unprecedented rate. Amidst this clamor, a quiet hunger began to emerge. People, often unwittingly, yearned for something beyond the material, something that could provide an anchor in an increasingly disorienting world. It wasn't a conscious search for Zen, yet, not by name, but a nascent yearning for what Zen embodies: stillness, presence, a direct apprehension of reality unclouded by dogma or endless intellectualizing. In Japan, the 19th century was also a period of profound upheaval. The country, long isolated, was forcibly opened to the West, leading to a scramble for modernization and a radical re-evaluation of its own traditions. Amidst this rapid change, many Zen masters, heirs to a lineage stretching back centuries, continued their practice in relative obscurity, their teachings preserved within the walls of their temples. They weren't actively seeking to proselytize the West. Their focus remained on the transmission of the Dharma to their own disciples, ensuring the continuity of their tradition. Yet, in their very existence, in their unwavering commitment to direct experience and liberation from suffering, they embodied a wisdom that would eventually captivate curious minds from afar. How did these two seemingly disparate worlds connect? It wasn't through grand evangelical missions or widespread translation projects at first. Instead, it was through subtle encounters, through the quiet observations of diplomats, scholars, and adventurous travelers who found themselves drawn to the unique aesthetic and philosophical underpinnings of Japanese culture. They might not have fully grasped the profound depths of Zen practice, but they sensed a fundamental difference, a profound sense of rootedness and clarity that contrasted sharply with the fragmented, often anxieties-ridden modern life they knew. You begin to see these early encounters as the first delicate threads being spun, weaving a tapestry that would one day connect East and West in unexpected ways. These were not intellectual exchanges in the formal sense, but rather a kind of osmotic process where ideas and sensibilities seeped across cultural boundaries. A diplomat might attend a tea ceremony and be struck by its meticulous ritual and profound sense of presence, unknowingly brushing against the very essence of Zen-infused aesthetics. A scholar might read an ancient poem, translated clumsily perhaps, and yet feel an echo of a truth that resonated deeply within their own philosophical leanings. The 19th century Zen masters, in their disciplined lives and profound insights, were unknowingly becoming beacons. Their teachings, though not yet directly accessible to the West, represented a living tradition of direct experience, of finding liberation not through external dogma, but through an internal transformation. It was this promise, however dimly perceived, that began to stir in the hearts of a few discerning Westerners, setting the stage for a spiritual migration that would shape the 20th century and beyond. They were the silent catalysts, the unacknowledged inspirations, whose centuries of practice created a spiritual wellspring from which the West, thirsting for something more, would eventually draw. You are witnessing the very first stirrings of this grand spiritual awakening, a quiet dawning of a new era of cross-cultural understanding. The West's search for stillness, you now understand, wasn't a sudden invention, but a gradual unfolding inspired by those who had already found it. As the 19th century unfolded, you can almost feel the air humming with an unseen current, a subtle yet powerful intellectual flow that began to bridge the vast geographical and cultural divide between East and West. This wasn't a river easily charted on a map, but an intricate network of streams, trickles, and subterranean springs, connecting minds across continents in ways few at the time fully understood. These weren't grand, publicly celebrated exchanges, but rather quiet infiltrations of thought, carried by a diverse array of individuals, scholars, poets, philosophers, and even ordinary travelers, who became unwitting conduits for Eastern wisdom. Consider the burgeoning field of philology, the study of language in its historical and cultural context. As European scholars delved into ancient Sanskrit and Pali texts, they began to uncover philosophical systems that challenged the very foundations of Western metaphysics. The Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and early Buddhist scriptures were slowly being translated, often imperfectly, but enough to spark profound curiosity. You might imagine a solitary scholar in a dusty library, poring over a newly translated text, suddenly encountering concepts like karma, reincarnation, or the idea of a unified consciousness, ideas that, while not explicitly Zen, laid fertile ground for its later reception. These were the intellectual precursors, the ground softeners, preparing the Western mind for a more direct engagement with Asian thought. But the current wasn't purely academic. There was also a growing romantic fascination with the exotic and the transcendent. Poets like Coleridge and Wordsworth, though rooted in Western traditions, articulated a yearning for a deeper connection with nature and an intuitive understanding of reality that resonated with certain Eastern philosophies. While they weren't studying Zen, their sensibility of finding profound meaning in the ordinary, or perceiving the divine in the natural world, echoed themes central to Zen Buddhism. You can sense this longing in their verses, a seeking for something beyond the rational, the quantifiable, a direct experience of truth that transcends linguistic or theological constructs. Then there were the missionaries and colonial administrators, often paradoxical agents of cultural exchange. While their primary aim might have been conversion or control, their prolonged exposure to Asian societies inevitably led to a certain degree of understanding, however flawed. They sent back reports, sometimes critical, sometimes fascinated, about the customs, beliefs, and practices they encountered, though often viewing Asian religions through a lens of Western superiority. Some couldn't help but be struck by the profound equanimity of Buddhist monks or the disciplined lives of Zen practitioners. You can almost hear their perplexed reports, detailing practices that seemed utterly alien, yet undeniably impactful on the lives of the local populace. These observations, filtered through various biases, nevertheless contributed to a growing, albeit often distorted, body of knowledge about the East. The rise of photography and travel literature also played a significant role. For the first time, Westerners could see images of Japanese temples, gardens, and everyday life. These visual representations, though static, conveyed a sense of order, beauty, and tranquility that contrasted sharply with the chaotic industrial landscapes of the West. Travelogues, often filled with romanticized or adventurous tales, brought distant lands closer to the armchair traveler. You might imagine someone in a London drawing room, flipping through a book of photographs of Kyoto, feeling a tug of curiosity about a culture that seemed to prioritize aesthetic harmony and a quiet dignity so different from their own fast-paced existence. Perhaps most subtly, the unseen current was also driven by a growing disillusionment with traditional Western institutions, particularly established religion. As scientific discoveries challenged biblical literalism and social upheavals questioned hierarchical structures, many thoughtful individuals began to seek spiritual nourishment outside conventional channels. This intellectual and spiritual vacuum created an opening for alternative perspectives. You can feel this yearning for a fresh narrative, a path to meaning that didn't rely on inherited dogma, but on personal experience and direct insight. Zen, with its emphasis on practice over creed and its focus on individual enlightenment, would eventually fill this void for many. So, while no Zen master was yet actively teaching in the West, and no widespread translations were yet available, the ground was being meticulously, almost imperceptibly, prepared. The intellectual curiosity sparked by philology, the romantic yearning for transcendence, the observational reports from missionaries and travelers, and the growing spiritual dissatisfaction in the West all converged to create a fertile intellectual and cultural landscape. This unseen current, flowing quietly beneath the surface of 19th-century society, ensured that when Zen eventually did arrive in the West, it wasn't landing on barren ground, but on soil already subtly conditioned to receive its profound message of stillness. You are now seeing how the stage was set, long before the actors knew their parts. You might be surprised to find a resonant echo of Zen's emphasis on direct experience and intuition, not in the exotic East, but in the familiar intellectual landscape of 19th 19th-century America, transcendentalism, this philosophical movement, spearheaded by figures like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, emerged as a distinctly American response to the rigidities of Puritanism and the burgeoning materialism of the Industrial Revolution. While they certainly weren't studying Zen texts, you'll discover surprising parallels between their core tenets and the nascent understanding of Zen that would later emerge in the West. Imagine yourself in the lush, rolling hills of Concord, Massachusetts, the air crisp and clean, the scent of pine needles and damp earth filling your senses. Here, Emerson, in his study, penned essays like Nature, asserting that truth could be apprehended not through dogma or tradition, but through direct, intuitive experience of the natural world and the over-soul, a universal spirit that pervaded all existence. This was a radical departure from the prevailing religious and philosophical norms. For Emerson, the individual was not merely a vessel for inherited knowledge, but a direct conduit to universal truths. You can almost hear him speaking of trusting your own instincts, of finding revelation not in dusty scriptures, but in the rustle of leaves or the silence of a starlit night. This emphasis on intuition over intellect and experience over doctrine is a cornerstone of Zen. Zen masters consistently point to direct, unmediated understanding, urging practitioners to see into their own nature, rather than relying on philosophical abstractions or religious dogma. Emerson, in his own way, was advocating for a similar kind of direct seeing, a bypassing of the rational mind to access a deeper reality. His call to build therefore your own world resonated with the Zen concept of self-realization, of discovering the Buddha, nature inherent within oneself, rather than seeking it externally. Then there's Henry David Thoreau, Emerson's younger contemporary and fellow transcendentalist, who truly embodied this philosophy. You can picture him retreating to his cabin by Walden Pond, stripping life down to its bare essentials, and seeking profound truths in the simple act of living deliberately. His famous dictum, "Simplify, simplify," echoes the Zen emphasis on non-attachment and stripping away illusion. Thoreau's profound observations of nature, the intricate dance of ants, the changing seasons, the quiet solitude of the pond, were not merely scientific inquiries, but attempts to connect with a deeper, underlying reality. This meticulous attention to the ordinary, finding the extraordinary within it, is a hallmark of Zen practice, where enlightenment is often found in the mundane acts of daily life, washing bowls, drinking tea, walking. You'll notice that both Emerson and Thoreau, like future Zen practitioners, championed individualism and self-reliance. They encourage people to look inward, to trust their own moral compass, and to forge their own spiritual paths, rather than conforming to societal pressures or inherited beliefs. This spiritual autonomy is profoundly aligned with Zen's focus on individual awakening, where no guru or external authority can grant you enlightenment. You must realize it for yourself. The Zen master's role is not to provide answers, but to point the way, to create the conditions for the student to discover their own truth. Even the transcendentalist's fascination with Eastern scriptures, though limited by available translations, provides a significant bridge. Emerson possessed copies of the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads, and while his exposure to specifically Buddhist texts was minimal, the overarching themes of unity, interconnectedness, and the illusory nature of the ego found fertile ground in his philosophical framework. he intuited a common thread running through the world's great spiritual traditions, a universal truth accessible to all. This open-mindedness, this willingness to seek wisdom beyond Western cultural boundaries, was a crucial prerequisite for the later reception of Zen. So, while Transcendentalism was not Zen, it was a powerful, indigenous American movement that inadvertently prepared the philosophical and spiritual soil for Zen's eventual arrival. It cultivated a mind set that valued direct experience, intuition, simplicity, self-reliance, and a deep connection to nature, all principles that are central to Zen Buddhism. You are seeing how the intellectual landscape was subtly shifting, creating an unexpected but remarkably receptive environment for the profound and ancient wisdom of the East. The echoes of Zen were already there, long before the word itself became known. With the intellectual groundwork laid by Transcendentalism and the subtle currents flowing between East and West, you now arrive at a fascinating juncture. The emergence of the first truly curious individuals who dared to look beyond conventional thought. These weren't necessarily Zen practitioners, nor even scholars of Asian religions in the modern sense. Rather, they were pioneering spirits, thinkers, and writers who, sensing a spiritual and philosophical void in their own culture, intuitively cast their gaze eastward. You might imagine them as spiritual prospectors, digging in unfamiliar terrain, hoping to unearth a hidden vein of wisdom. One of the earliest and most significant figures you'll encounter is Henry Olcott, an American military officer, journalist, and lawyer. His journey from conventional life to spiritual seeker is emblematic of this period. Olcott, initially drawn to spiritualism, found himself increasingly intrigued by the deeper philosophical underpinnings of Eastern traditions. In 1875, he co-founded the Theosophical Society with Helena Blavatsky, a pivotal moment in the Western engagement with Asian thought. While Theosophy was an eclectic blend of various mystical traditions, it placed a significant emphasis on ancient Eastern wisdom, particularly Indian philosophy and Buddhism. You see Olcott, along with Blavatsky, actively promoting the study of Sanskrit and Pali texts, translating scriptures, and advocating for a universal religious truth that transcended sectarian boundaries. Their work, though often criticized for its syncretic nature, was instrumental in popularizing concepts like karma, reincarnation, and the idea of spiritual evolution to a broad Western audience. It was through theosophical publications and lectures that many educated Westerners first encountered Buddhist ideas, albeit filtered through a distinctly theosophical lens. While not directly presenting Zen, Theosophy's embrace of a secret doctrine from the East primed minds for the notion that profound spiritual truths existed outside the Judeo-Christian framework. You can sense the excitement and controversy they generated, challenging established norms and opening new avenues of thought. Simultaneously, a nascent interest in Oriental art and aesthetics began to blossom, as Japan, in particular, opened its doors to the West in the latter half of the century. Japanese woodblock prints, ukiyo-e, and decorative arts flooded European and American markets. Artists like Claude Monet and Vincent van Gogh were profoundly influenced by Japanese aesthetics, admiring their bold compositions, flat planes of color, and asymmetrical balance. This aesthetic appreciation, while not directly philosophical, subtly introduced a sensibility that paralleled Zen principles of simplicity, naturalness, and directness. You might imagine a Western artist captivated by the stark elegance of a Japanese landscape print, unknowingly absorbing a sense of profound stillness and immediacy that was inherently Zen-like. Beyond the formal movements and artistic trends, there were also the individual travelers and writers whose experiences became narratives of discovery. People like Lafcadio Hearn, an Irish-Greek writer who emigrated to Japan in the late 19th century, offered vivid, often romanticized, accounts of Japanese life and culture. Hearn immersed himself deeply, married a Japanese woman, and eventually became a Japanese citizen. His writings, such as Glimpses of Unfamiliar Japan and Kokoro, presented a Japan steeped in tradition, poetry, and a profound sense of the mystical. While Hearn's understanding of Zen was probably more intuitive and aesthetic than doctrinal, his eloquent descriptions of Japanese temples, gardens, and the contemplative lives of monks painted an alluring picture for his Western readers. You can feel the pull of his prose, drawing you into a world where beauty and spirituality were intimately intertwined, a world that seemed to offer an antidote to the perceived harshness of Western modernity. These early seekers weren't necessarily looking for enlightenment in the precise Zen sense, but they were searching for something more. They were disenchanted with the materialism of their age, dissatisfied with the answers provided by conventional religion, and intrigued by the promise of ancient wisdom. Their explorations, whether through theosophy, art, or personal travel, created ripples that expanded the Western intellectual and spiritual horizon. They were the pioneers, the ones who first ventured into the vast ocean of Eastern thought, often without a clear map, but with an unwavering sense of curiosity and a deep-seated yearning for a different kind of truth. You are witnessing the very first conscious steps taken by the West towards a deeper engagement with the profound, life-altering wisdom of Zen. As the 19th century progressed, you sense a distinct magnetic pull drawing adventurous Western minds towards a specific, once closed nation. Japan, the lure of the East, was not a monolithic phenomenon, but Japan, in particular, exerted a unique charm. After over 2 centuries of self-imposed isolation under the Tokugawa shogunate, the forced opening by Commodore Matthew Perry in 1853 ignited a fervent curiosity in the West. This wasn't just about political or economic access. It was about peering into a culture that had developed largely untouched by Western influence, a culture that seemed to embody a profound sense of aestheticism, discipline, and spiritual depth. Imagine the wonder, almost bordering on disbelief, as the first detailed reports and images of Japan began to reach the West. Here was a society where elaborate tea ceremonies were a way of life, where gardens were meticulously crafted works of art, where martial arts were not just about combat, but about spiritual mastery, and where poetry was interwoven with daily existence. This stark contrast to the rapidly industrializing, increasingly pragmatic West made Japan appear like a living, breathing artifact from a more harmonious past, or perhaps a vision of an alternative future. You can almost feel the sense of yearning this evoked in many who felt adrift in the burgeoning modern world. A significant part of this allure stemmed from Japanese aesthetics, which, unbeknownst to most Westerners at the time, were deeply infused with Zen principles. Concepts like wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection and transience, satori, sudden enlightenment, and the emphasis on natural materials and simplicity resonated profoundly with Western artists and designers who were growing tired of ornate Victorian excess. Japanese woodblock prints, as mentioned before, not only influenced Impressionist and post-Impressionist painters, but also subtly introduced a visual language that spoke of balance, negative space, and direct observation, qualities inherent in Zen art. You might see a Western designer fascinated by the stark lines of a Japanese no mask or the elegant simplicity of a bamboo flute, beginning to internalize an aesthetic philosophy that mirrored Zen's stripped-down approach to reality. The very mystery and perceived exoticism of Japan also played a powerful role. For centuries, it had been a largely inaccessible island nation, fostering an image of an untouched, almost mythical land. When it opened, it was as if a secret garden had finally been revealed. This sense of discovering something ancient and pristine, yet vibrantly alive, captured the imagination. Travelers, writers, and even budding scholars flocked to its shores, eager to witness its unique customs and uncover its hidden philosophies. You sense an almost romantic quest for authenticity, a search for a spiritual anchor in a world that felt increasingly artificial. Furthermore, the resilience and adaptability of Japanese culture in the face of rapid modernization also fascinated Western observers. As Japan swiftly adopted Western technologies and political structures during the Meiji Restoration, it also fiercely maintained its unique cultural identity. This ability to absorb external influences while preserving core traditions suggested a profound inner strength and a wisdom that intrigued those who felt their own cultures were losing their soul in the pursuit of progress. You might ponder how a nation could embrace the locomotive and the telegraph while simultaneously upholding ancient rituals and contemplative practices. This apparent paradox only deepened the fascination. While direct knowledge of Zen Buddhism was still limited, many of the cultural expressions that captivated Westerners, tea ceremony, flower arranging ikebana, traditional gardens, and martial arts, were deeply interwoven with Zen thought. These practices, designed to cultivate mindfulness, discipline, and a direct apprehension of the present moment, served as accessible entry points into a sensibility that was inherently Zen-like. A Western visitor attending a tea ceremony might not understand its philosophical underpinnings, but would undoubtedly experience the profound sense of stillness, meticulous attention, and present moment awareness it demanded. These experiences, though perhaps not intellectually articulated as Zen, offered a taste of what its direct practice could yield. Thus, the lure of Japan in the 19th century was multi-faceted: a visual and aesthetic feast, a mysterious and exotic land, a testament to cultural resilience, and, most importantly, a living repository of practices and sensibilities that, even unknowingly, embodied the very stillness and presence that the West was beginning to seek. You are witnessing the magnetic pull of a culture that, in its essence, held the subtle keys to a spiritual awakening that would soon begin to unlock Western minds. You are now at a pivotal moment, witnessing the emergence of a truly significant figure who acted as a direct conduit, introducing Zen aesthetics and philosophy to a curious American audience, Okakura Kakosi. His arrival and influence in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were not just incremental steps, but rather a leap forward, translating subtle Japanese sensibilities into terms understandable and deeply appealing to the Western mind. He wasn't a Zen master, but a brilliant scholar and cultural ambassador who understood the profound spiritual underpinnings of Japanese art. Imagine Okakura, a man of refined intellect and deep cultural understanding, arriving in America. Born in Yokohama, Japan, in 1862, he was educated in Western subjects from a young age, including English, under the tutelage of American missionaries. This bilingual and bicultural background made him uniquely positioned to bridge the gap between East and West. You see him as a cultural polyglot, capable of articulating the nuances of Japanese thought in a way that resonated with Western intellectual traditions. His most famous work, The Book of Tea, published in English in 1906, was not merely a guide to the Japanese tea ceremony. It was a profound philosophical treatise that used the familiar ritual of tea as a gateway to explain the broader principles of Japanese aesthetics, art, and most importantly, the underlying spirit of Zen. Okakura didn't just describe the physical act of tea preparation, he illuminated the spirit of the way of tea, emphasizing its embrace of simplicity, imperfection, and the present moment. You can almost hear his elegant prose, explaining how the tea ceremony, in its meticulousness and quiet beauty, was a form of teaism, a cult of the beautiful, where life finds solace in the harmony of things. What made the Book of Tea so impactful was its ability to articulate Zen-infused concepts without explicitly using the term Zen Buddhism at every turn. Instead, Okakura spoke of empty space, of the beauty found in the unadorned, of the art of emptiness, concepts deeply rooted in Zen philosophy. He explained how Japanese art valued suggestion over explicit statement, finding profundity in what was left unsaid or unseen, much like the direct, non-conceptual approach of Zen. He presented this aesthetic not as something alien, but as a universal human longing for beauty and harmony, making it accessible to a Western audience already grappling with the excesses of the industrial age. You observe how Okakura, as an art critic and curator, played a crucial role in shaping Western perceptions of Asian art. He worked at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts from 1904 until his death in 1913, advising on its Asian collections and contributing significantly to the understanding and appreciation of Japanese and Chinese art in the West. He argued passionately against the prevailing Western view that Asian art was merely decorative or primitive, instead emphasizing its profound philosophical and spiritual foundations. His efforts elevated the status of Asian art, allowing Westerners to see it not just as exotic curiosities, but as expressions of deep wisdom and sophisticated aesthetic principles. Okakura's influence extended beyond the art world. Through his writings and lectures, he introduced a generation of intellectuals, artists, and seekers to a sensibility that was quiet, contemplative, and profoundly different from the bustling materialism of the West. He showed them that simplicity could be a form of profound richness, that imperfection held its own beauty, and that the present moment, when fully embraced, could be a source of infinite peace. You can feel the resonance of his ideas with those who were already searching for alternatives to a purely materialistic existence. His ability to present complex Eastern ideas in an elegant, accessible English prose made him an invaluable cultural bridge. He demystified aspects of Japanese culture and presented them not as something to be merely observed, but as a way of being that offered profound lessons for Western life. While D.T. Suzuki would later provide the rigorous intellectual framework for Zen Buddhism, Okakura prepared the cultural and aesthetic ground, subtly planting the seeds of Zen's underlying spirit through the appreciation of art and the ritual of tea. you recognize him as a crucial precursor. A quiet but powerful force who paved the way for the direct transmission of Zen to the West by revealing the inherent stillness and beauty within Japanese culture itself. You now stand at a truly pivotal moment, witnessing the arrival of the individual who would become Zen's primary, most influential voice in the West, Dazetsu Tataro Suzuki. His work wasn't merely influential, it was foundational, laying the intellectual and spiritual groundwork for Zen's widespread acceptance. If Okakura Kakos prepared the aesthetic and cultural palette, Suzuki meticulously provided the philosophical and experiential feast. Imagine the year 1897. A young, earnest Japanese scholar, D.T. Suzuki, fresh from studying at Tokyo Imperial University, arrives in LaSalle, Illinois. His purpose? To assist Paul Carus, a German-American philosopher and editor at the Open Court Publishing Company. Carus was deeply interested in bridging Eastern and Western thought, particularly in presenting Buddhism to a Western audience, and he recognized in Suzuki a rare combination of rigorous scholarship and profound insight into his native traditions. You can almost feel the quiet ambition and dedication emanating from Suzuki, stepping onto American soil not as a missionary, but as a bridge builder of ideas. Suzuki's initial work with Carus involved translating a wide range of Buddhist texts, including those related to Zen. This period was crucial for Suzuki himself, forcing him to articulate complex Eastern concepts in clear, precise English. He wasn't just translating words, he was translating a worldview, a way of understanding reality that was fundamentally different from the Western scientific and philosophical paradigms. You see him grappling with the nuances of language, striving to convey the ineffable directly. What made Suzuki's contribution so monumental was his unique ability to explain Zen not as an exotic curiosity or a mere academic subject, but as a living, experiential path to liberation. Unlike many earlier Western scholars who approached Buddhism from a purely textual or historical perspective, Suzuki had engaged in Zen practice himself, including periods of monastic training. This personal, embodied understanding allowed him to convey the spirit of Zen in a way that resonated deeply with Western seekers. He emphasized the direct experience of Satori, enlightenment, the importance of Zazen's seated meditation, and the paradoxical nature of koans, riddles designed to break through conceptual thought. His extensive series of books, beginning with Essays in Zen Buddhism, are published in 3 volumes from 1927 to 1934, became the definitive introduction to Zen for generations of Westerners. You can picture countless intellectuals, artists, and spiritual aspirants poring over these texts, finally encountering a coherent explanation of Zen's core tenets. Suzuki presented Zen as a practical philosophy, a way of cutting through intellectualizing and directly realizing one's true nature. He highlighted Zen's independence from scripture, its reliance on direct transmission from master to disciple, and its emphasis on transcending dualistic thinking. Suzuki's lectures, particularly those delivered at Columbia University in the 1950s, captivated a new generation of American thinkers, artists and poets. He became a guru of sorts, though he never sought such a title, for figures like Alan Watts, Erich Fromm, and members of the burgeoning Beat generation. You might imagine the profound impact of hearing Suzuki, a quiet, unassuming man, calmly articulate ideas that shattered conventional perceptions of reality and offered a radical path to inner freedom. His presence was not flamboyant, but deeply authoritative, stemming from a lifetime of study and practice. He skillfully navigated the complexities of cross-cultural communication, recognizing that Western minds, steeped in rationalism and a subject-object duality, needed a different entry point into Zen than traditional Japanese students. He didn't dilute Zen, but rather framed it in terms that highlighted its universal applicability, its focus on the inherent capacity for enlightenment within every individual. You realize that Suzuki's true genius lay not just in his scholarship, but in his profound empathy for the Western intellectual condition, allowing him to present Zen as a solution to its specific spiritual quandaries. Through his tireless efforts, D.T. Suzuki transformed Zen from an obscure Asian sect into a globally recognized spiritual path. His arrival in America and his subsequent decades of prolific writing and lecturing established the intellectual and conceptual framework through which millions in the West would come to understand and eventually practice Zen Buddhism. You acknowledge him as the crucial architect, the primary voice without whom the widespread search for stillness in the West might never have truly begun. With D.T. Suzuki providing the intellectual and philosophical blueprint, you now turn your gaze to a more tangible, yet equally humble, development: the very first American Zendo. This wasn't a grand, purpose-built temple, but rather a quiet, unassuming space that served as the initial seedbed for Zen practice on American soil. Its origins are far removed from the romanticized image of a thriving, established Zen community. Instead, they reflect the dedication of a few pioneering individuals eager to bring direct Zen practice to the West. Imagine yourself in the early 20th century, specifically around 1930, in a modest apartment in New York City. Here, a group of dedicated individuals, largely inspired by D.T. Suzuki's writings and lectures, began to gather. This wasn't an organized institution in the modern sense. It was more akin to a study group, a collection of curious minds drawn together by a shared yearning for direct experience and the stillness that Zen promised. You can sense the quiet determination in these early practitioners, sitting together, perhaps awkwardly at first, trying to embody principles that were centuries old and culturally alien. One of the most significant figures in establishing these nascent practice spaces was Soke and Shigetsu Sasaki. While Suzuki explained Zen theoretically, Sasaki was one of the first Zen masters to actually reside and teach in the United States. He arrived in America in 1906, sent by his master, Sokatsu Shaku, after some years of travel and engagement with Western society. He settled in New York and began to gather students. His teachings were direct, unvarnished, and focused on the practical aspects of Zazen, seated meditation, and koan study. You can almost feel the shift from intellectual curiosity to practical application as his students sat, facing walls, grappling with the profound silence and the challenging paradoxes of Zen. Sasaki's efforts led to the formation of the first Zen Institute of America in 1930. This was arguably the first formal Zendo in the United States, though its initial quarters were humble, often just rented rooms or even Sasaki's own apartment. It was here that true Zen practice, beyond intellectual discussion, began to take root. Students would come, often after long days at work, seeking a different kind of nourishment, a space for quiet introspection and disciplined practice. You can picture them, a diverse group including artists, writers, intellectuals, and curious seekers, committing to regular sitting, learning the basic postures, and attempting to quiet their restless minds. The atmosphere in these early Zendo spaces would have been remarkably different from the grand temples of Japan. There were no ornate altars, no ancient wooden structures. Instead, there was a stark simplicity, a focus on the essential act of sitting. The emphasis was on sincerity and effort rather than outward display. You would sense the quiet intensity, the collective effort to plunge inward, to confront the self, often with discomfort and resistance. The master, Sasaki, would guide them not with flowery lectures, but with direct instructions, sharp insights, and sometimes a silence that spoke volumes. The challenges were immense. These were pioneers attempting to transplant an ancient Eastern discipline into a fast-paced, materialistically oriented Western society. There were no established communities, no widespread understanding, and certainly no easy path. Students struggled with the discipline, the foreign concepts, and the often unsettling self-discovery that Zen practice entailed. Yet, they persisted, driven by an intuitive recognition of Zen's profound value. You realize that this was not a fad, but a serious, often arduous, spiritual undertaking for those involved. The first Zen Institute of America, under Sasaki's guidance, played a crucial role in laying the foundation for future Zen centers. It demonstrated that Zen practice could indeed be established and maintained in the West, that Western minds could engage directly with its disciplines, and that its teachings were universally applicable, transcending cultural boundaries. While its impact was initially small in terms of numbers, its significance was immeasurable in terms of setting a precedent and cultivating the very first generation of Western Zen practitioners. You witness the beginning of something truly transformative, a quiet revolution of consciousness starting from a few individuals sitting in stillness. You've seen the intellectual seeds planted, the aesthetic sensibilities cultivated, and the first dedicated practice spaces quietly established. Now, as the mid-20th century dawns, you witness an explosive cultural phenomenon that would catapult Zen from the fringes into the mainstream consciousness of the West. The Beat Generation's embrace. This wasn't a scholarly or systematic adoption, but a visceral, intuitive connection, fueled by a deep dissatisfaction with post-war conformity and a fervent search for authentic experience. Imagine the smoky, jazz-filled coffeehouses of Greenwich Village in New York or North Beach in San Francisco in the 1950s. The air crackles with rebellion, poetry, and a raw yearning for liberation. This was the crucible of the Beat Generation, a loose confederation of writers, poets, and artists. Figures like Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and Gary Snyder. They rejected the suburban dream, the corporate ladder, and the stifling conservatism of Eisenhower's America. They sought freedom, authenticity, and spiritual truth, often in unconventional places. You can almost hear the rhythmic clatter of a typewriter, churning out prose that was as wild and unfettered as their lives. For the Beats, Zen wasn't a religion to be formally converted to, but a powerful lens through which to view the world, a radical philosophy that validated their own counter-cultural impulses. They were drawn to its emphasis on direct experience, spontaneity, and the rejection of intellectualism and dogma. Kerouac, in particular, was captivated. His novel The Dharma Bums, 1958, became a quintessential text for the movement, famously depicting the adventures of a group of friends, thinly veiled versions of Kerouac, Gary Snyder, and others as they hitchhike, climb mountains, drink wine, and discuss Buddhism. In the Dharma Bums, you see Kerouac's character, Ray Smith Kerouac himself, wrestling with spiritual questions, finding solace in nature, and attempting to practice Zazen-seated meditation as taught by Jaffe Ryder Snyder. Kerouac's often chaotic stream of consciousness prose perfectly mirrored the Zen ideal of unmediated experience, a flow of consciousness unburdened by ego or convention. His yearning for it, a direct, unmediated apprehension of reality, resonated deeply with the Zen concept of satori, or awakening. He wasn't always a disciplined practitioner, often mixing Zen with alcohol and spontaneous adventures, but his passionate engagement popularized the idea of Zen to a mass audience. You feel the raw energy and sincerity of his search, even in its imperfections. Gary Snyder, a poet and environmentalist, was perhaps the most serious and knowledgeable Zen practitioner among the Beats. He had a rigorous academic background in Asian languages and had already begun serious Zen practice, later going on to live and train in Japanese monasteries for years. Snyder introduced his friends, including Kerouac, to the practical aspects of Zen, sharing books by D.T. Suzuki and encouraging meditation. You see Snyder as the quiet anchor of authenticity, grounding the Beats' enthusiastic but sometimes superficial engagement with a deeper understanding of the practice. His commitment to Zen, intertwined with his deep respect for nature and indigenous cultures, presented a model of engaged spirituality. Allen Ginsberg, another central figure, was also deeply influenced. His poetic explorations of consciousness, liberation, and societal critique found a profound resonance in Zen's radical questioning of conventional reality. Zen provided a framework for breaking down ego and perceiving the interconnectedness of all things, themes that permeated Ginsberg's groundbreaking poetry, particularly his later works. You recognize the intellectual and spiritual ferment, as these artists sought not just new forms of expression, but new ways of being in the world. The Beat generation's adoption of Zen, though often romanticized and sometimes misunderstood, was crucial for its popularization. They stripped away the academic formality and presented Zen as something vibrant, rebellious, and directly applicable to contemporary life. They made Zen cool, an alternative lifestyle choice for those seeking to escape the perceived phoniness of mainstream society. While some critics argued their understanding was superficial, their enthusiasm created an undeniable buzz, drawing countless young people to D.T. Suzuki's books and eventually to actual Zen centers. You sense the profound impact of their cultural rebellion, opening doors that formal scholarship alone could not. The Beats didn't just read about Zen, they tried to live it, however imperfectly, and in doing so, they inspired a generation to embark on their own search for stillness. You've seen the intellectual currents, the early seekers, and the passionate embrace of the Beats. Now, you'll encounter the voice that truly articulated and popularized Zen for a mass Western audience, making its profound wisdom accessible and captivating. Alan Watts. More than a scholar or a practitioner in the monastic sense, Watts was a brilliant communicator, a gifted orator, and a prolific writer who translated the often abstruse concepts of Zen into compelling, relatable terms. Imagine sitting in a dimly lit lecture hall in California in the 1950s or 60s, or perhaps listening to a crackling radio broadcast from KPFA in Berkeley. You hear a voice, mellow, erudite, yet playful, expounding on the nature of reality, the illusion of the ego, and the liberating wisdom of Zen. That was Alan Watts. Born in England in 1915, Watts had an early fascination with Asia and spirituality. Initially drawn to Christianity, but quickly moving beyond its confines. He was exposed to Zen through the writings of D.T. Suzuki and later became a student of Sokai and Shigetsu Sasaki. While he never achieved full Zen ordination, his unique blend of intellectual rigor and poetic insight made him an unparalleled interpreter. Watts's particular genius lay in his ability to demystify Zen without stripping it of its depth. He didn't focus on rigid rules or ascetic practices, but rather on Zen as a way of understanding and experiencing the world. He emphasized Zen's inherent freedom, its rejection of striving, and its recognition that enlightenment isn't something to be attained in the future, but a realization of what is already present. His approach resonated deeply with a Western audience seeking liberation from the anxieties of modern life and the pressures of conventional religion. You can feel the sense of relief his words offered, a profound permission to relax into reality. His most influential book, The Way of Zen, 1957, became an instant classic and a gateway for countless individuals into Eastern thought. In it, Watts masterfully traced the historical development of Buddhism, explained the core principles of Zen, and highlighted its unique contributions to human understanding. He clarified complex ideas like muse, nothingness, Satori's awakening, and the concept of no mind with remarkable clarity and wit. He made Zen seem not only intellectually coherent, but also deeply appealing as a path to a more authentic and joyful existence. You picture someone picking up this book, perhaps after hearing of Zen from a beat poet, and suddenly finding a clear, engaging explanation for what had seemed esoteric and distant. Watts was also a charismatic lecturer and broadcaster. His radio programs on KPFA, often accompanied by classical Indian music, brought his distinctive voice and ideas into homes across America. He had a rare talent for extemporaneous speech, weaving together philosophy, psychology, and personal anecdotes with effortless grace. He challenged the Western dualism of mind and body, self and other, and subject and object, asserting that Zen offered a way to transcend these artificial divisions and experience the interconnectedness of all things. You can imagine the profound impact of his serene, yet incisive voice, cutting through the noise of everyday life, offering a glimpse of a different reality. Crucially, Watts positioned Zen as a spiritual antidote to the psychological malaise of the West. He argued that Western neuroses stemmed from a relentless pursuit of the future, a constant striving for what wasn't, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the present moment. Zen, conversely, offered a path to being fully present, to experiencing life as it is, here and now, without judgment or incessant mental commentary. He articulated the idea that the ego, which Western psychology often tried to strengthen, was in fact the very source of suffering, and that Zen provided a means to see through its illusions. While some traditional Zen practitioners later criticized Watts for popularizing Zen in a way that sometimes lacked the rigor of monastic practice, his role in introducing Zen to a vast audience is undeniable. He was the great articulator, the eloquent bridge builder who made Zen not just intelligible, but deeply desirable for millions. His legacy continues to resonate, demonstrating how powerful and transformative profound ideas can be when delivered by a master communicator. You understand now that without Alan Watts, the West's search for stillness would have remained largely confined to academic circles and a passionate, but smaller, countercultural fringe. You've seen the intellectual currents flow and the captivating voices emerge. Now, you witness how Zen became an integral, often foundational, spiritual cornerstone for an entire generation seeking radical freedom and alternative ways of living. The counterculture's quest. This wasn't a neatly packaged spiritual movement, but a diffuse, eclectic, and often chaotic search for meaning that found profound resonance in Zen's non-conformist, experiential wisdom. Imagine the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Vietnam War raging, civil rights struggles intensifying, and a pervasive sense of disillusionment with established authority and traditional values. Young people, particularly in America, were seeking something fundamentally different. They questioned everything, from politics and economics to sexuality and spirituality. This was the era of tune in, turn on, drop out, a vibrant, tumultuous period of experimentation and revolution. You feel the palpable energy of a generation desperate to break free from the shackles of conformity and find a deeper, more authentic way to exist. For many within the counterculture, traditional Western religions seemed hypercritical, dogmatic, and complicit with the very systems they sought to dismantle. Zen, on the other hand, offered a refreshing alternative. It wasn't about blind faith, rigid rituals, or an external god. Instead, it emphasized direct experience, personal liberation, and an inherent wisdom within each individual. This resonated deeply with a generation that valued autonomy, authenticity, and a suspicion of all authority. You can almost hear the discussions in communal living spaces or at anti-war protests, as young people debated Watts and Suzuki, seeing Zen as a radical path to inner freedom. Zen's emphasis on non-duality and interconnectedness also appealed profoundly to the counterculture's holistic worldview. The idea that all things are one, that the self is not separate from the universe, provided a philosophical framework for environmentalism, universal love, and a rejection of the divisive nature of war and social injustice. Concepts like muse, nothingness, and the understanding that categories are ultimately illusory offered a way to transcend the or thinking that seemed to plague society. You see how this philosophical perspective fed into the nascent environmental movement and the push for greater social harmony. The connection between Zen and the exploration of psychedelic drugs is also undeniable during this period. For some, LSD and other mind-altering substances were seen as a shortcut to the expanded states of consciousness described in Eastern mystical traditions, including Zen's Satori, while traditional Zen masters largely condemned such chemical shortcuts. Many counterculture figures, influenced by writers like Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, formerly Richard Alpert, saw parallels between the drug-induced dissolution of ego and the Zen experience of no self. You recognize the inherent risk in this approach, but also the desperate yearning for immediate, transformative insight that drove it. Furthermore, Zen's aesthetic of simplicity, naturalness, and anti-materialism aligned perfectly with the counterculture's rejection of consumerism. The appeal of Zen gardens, minimalist art, and the idea of finding richness in everyday, unadorned existence contrasted sharply with the suburban materialism they disavowed. This aesthetic translated into fashion, design, and a general lifestyle choice that valued experience over possessions. You see young people embracing simple clothing, natural foods, and communal living, often inspired by the quiet dignity they perceived in Zen-influenced culture. The rise of Zen centers across America during this period was a direct result of this surge in interest. While Soke and Sasaki had established the first Zen institute decades earlier, the 60s saw new Zen teachers, often from Japan, establishing formal practice centers that attracted thousands. Roshi Philip Kaplu's Rochester Zen Center, Shunryu Suzuki's San Francisco Zen Center, and Taizan Mizumi's Zen Center of Los Angeles became crucial hubs for serious practice, offering Zazen instruction and traditional monastic training. You observe the transition from purely intellectual fascination to committed, disciplined practice, as many began to seek genuine spiritual transformation rather than just intellectual understanding. Ultimately, the counterculture's quest for freedom and meaning found a powerful ally in Zen. It provided a language, a philosophy, and a set of practices that resonated deeply with their desire to break free from convention and experience life in a more profound, authentic way. While the embrace was sometimes romanticized or superficial, it undeniably propelled Zen into the American mainstream, laying the groundwork for its enduring presence in Western spiritual life. You see how a generation's rebellion inadvertently opened the door for an ancient wisdom to take root and flourish. You've seen Zen permeate counterculture and artistic circles, but you now observe its quiet, yet significant infiltration into another crucial sphere, academia. While D.T. Suzuki had already laid intellectual groundwork, the mid to late 20th century saw universities slowly but steadily beginning to engage with Zen, not just as a fringe spiritual pursuit, but as a serious subject for scholarly inquiry. This marked a crucial step in legitimizing Zen within Western intellectual discourse, moving it beyond the realm of exoticism and into rigorous study. Imagine university departments, traditionally focused on Western philosophy, theology, and literature, gradually opening their doors to new perspectives. Early pioneers like Frederick Frank, an artist and author who also engaged deeply with Zen, contributed to this shift. Though not an academic in the strict sense, his widely read book, The Zen of Seeing, 1973, introduced Zen principles of mindfulness and direct perception to a broader audience, including those in educational settings, hinting at the practical applications of Zen beyond meditation halls. You can see how his work, visually rich and experientially focused, helped bridge the gap between abstract philosophy and lived experience. The growing number of formal Zen centers across the West, established by Japanese masters and their Western successors, also contributed indirectly to academic interest. As more people practiced Zen, the need for deeper textual and historical understanding grew. Students and scholars wanted to know the origins, the lineages, and the philosophical nuances of the tradition they were engaging with. This demand prompted universities to consider offering courses and eventually establishing programs in Buddhist studies. You sense a natural progression as practice deepened, so too did the desire for scholarly context. Crucially, the arrival of Japanese Zen masters, who were themselves highly educated, further facilitated this academic engagement. Figures like Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who founded the San Francisco Zen Center, attracted not only earnest practitioners, but also intellectuals who were drawn to his profound yet simple teachings. While his primary focus was on practice, his presence and the depth of his understanding inspired academic interest, prompting scholars to study the lineage and teachings he embodied. You might imagine university professors attending Zazen sessions or lectures, initially as curious observers, but gradually realizing the profound philosophical insights contained within the tradition. The 1970s and 80s witnessed a more formalized integration. Universities began to establish departments or programs in religious studies, Asian studies, and comparative philosophy, where Zen Buddhism could be taught within a scholarly framework. Courses on Buddhism, including specific segments on Zen, became increasingly common. This meant that students could now approach Zen not just through popular books or informal groups, but through structured academic inquiry, examining its historical development, its philosophical arguments, and its literary expressions. You see the rigor of academic method being applied to a tradition that had often been shrouded in mystical or counter-cultural interpretations. Key figures in this academic legitimization included scholars who translated primary Zen texts, conducted historical research, and analyzed Zen philosophy using Western academic methodologies. They engaged with questions of authenticity, transmission, and the cross-cultural interpretations of Zen. This scholarly work helped to separate genuine Zen teachings from superficial popularizations, providing a critical lens through which to understand the tradition more accurately. You recognize the invaluable contribution of these academics in building a robust foundation for Zen studies in the West. However, this academic engagement wasn't without its challenges. The very nature of Zen, with its emphasis on direct experience over conceptual understanding, sometimes clashed with the academic inclination to categorize, analyze, and intellectualize. Scholars wrestled with the paradox of studying something that explicitly defied intellectualization. Yet, this tension often led to deeper, more nuanced understandings of both Zen and the limitations of academic inquiry itself. You sense the healthy friction between these two approaches, pushing both scholars and practitioners to consider the boundaries of their respective fields. Ultimately, the awakening of academic interest in Zen was a vital step in its journey westward. It moved Zen beyond the realm of a fleeting fad or an exclusive spiritual path, and established it as a legitimate and profound subject for intellectual exploration. This academic grounding provided a critical framework for understanding Zen's rich history and complex philosophy, ensuring its enduring presence in Western thought. You realize that this quiet institutional shift played a crucial role in deepening the West's collective search for stillness. You've seen Zen flourish in unexpected corners of Western society, from bohemian coffee houses to university lecture halls. But as any popular idea finds its footing, you now inevitably encounter a challenging phenomenon. Commercialization's shadow, the very allure of Zen, its promise of stillness and wisdom, began to be commodified, transformed into marketable products and simplified concepts, sometimes at the expense of its deeper meaning. Imagine the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The once esoteric wisdom of Zen starts appearing in unexpected places. Self-help books promising instant tranquility, corporate workshops on mindfulness for productivity, Zen-themed home decor, and even Zen gardens in miniature, complete with rakes for desk-bound contemplation. This wasn't necessarily a malicious act, but rather a natural consequence of a profound spiritual tradition gaining mainstream appeal. The West, with its entrepreneurial spirit, quickly recognized the market potential of a concept that seemed to offer an antidote to the stresses of modern life. You can almost see the marketing executives brainstorming slogans: "Find your inner peace now," or "Zen your way to success." The core challenge of commercialization lies in its tendency to simplify complex concepts for mass consumption. Zen, which emphasizes rigorous practice, challenging self-inquiry, and a lifetime of dedication, was often reduced to easily digestible aphorisms or quick fixes. The deep, often uncomfortable work of zazen's, seated meditation and koan study, which are designed to dismantle the ego and confront fundamental delusions, could be rebranded as mere stress reduction techniques or ways to enhance creativity. You might feel a pang of concern as the profound truth of Zen is distilled into a palatable, profitable package. One of the most visible manifestations of this shadow is the rise of mindfulness as a secular, decontextualized practice, while mindfulness, rooted in Buddhist meditation, is undeniably beneficial. Its commercial adoption often stripped it of its ethical framework. Its traditional spiritual goals, like liberation from suffering, and its connection to a larger philosophical system. It became a tool for individual well-being and corporate efficiency, detached from the deep wisdom of the Eightfold Path or the Bodhisattva vows. You observe the irony of a practice aimed at transcending materialism being used to enhance material productivity. Furthermore, the Zen aesthetic also became a marketable commodity. The simplicity, clean lines, and natural materials associated with Zen-inspired design were embraced by mainstream culture, leading to Zen furniture, Zen music, and Zen interior design. While this could raise awareness of the aesthetic, it often reduced Zen to a superficial style rather than a profound way of seeing and being. You might walk into a store and see a Zen fountain next to a Zen garden kit, noting how the profound principles of wabi, sabi, and mu were now reduced to decorative items. The commodification also created a proliferation of instant Zen literature and workshops. Books promising enlightenment in a weekend or quick guides to Zen for business leaders appeared on shelves. These often bypassed the necessity of a dedicated teacher, rigorous practice, and community support, presenting Zen as a self-help methodology rather than a transformative spiritual path. You might question the authenticity of such offerings, recognizing that true stillness and wisdom usually require sustained effort and guidance, not just intellectual consumption. However, you also recognize that commercialization isn't entirely negative. While it risks dilution, it also significantly broadened awareness of Zen concepts. Many people who initially encountered Zen through a mindfulness app or a Zen-themed product might have been intrigued enough to seek out deeper, more authentic teachings. It created a widespread curiosity that in some cases led individuals to discover actual Zen centers and engage in serious practice. You see it as a double-edged sword, a potential for superficiality, but also a wider gateway. Despite the shadow of commercialization, the enduring power of Zen lies in its core message of direct experience and the cultivation of stillness. While products and trends might come and go, the fundamental human yearning for peace and liberation remains. The challenge for Zen in the West, you realize, is to navigate this commercial landscape, maintaining its integrity while still reaching those who genuinely seek its profound wisdom. You understand that the search for stillness, once inspired by distant masters, now faces the very modern challenge of distinguishing genuine practice from marketable imitation. You've seen Zen's journey from obscure Eastern wisdom to a globally recognized phenomenon, even grappling with the complexities of commercialization. Now, you arrive at a crucial and ongoing tension. authenticity struggle as Zen puts down deeper roots in the West. It faces the constant challenge of maintaining its traditional integrity while adapting to a new cultural context. This isn't a simple binary of pure versus corrupted, but a nuanced dance between preserving the essence of a centuries-old tradition and making it relevant for contemporary seekers. Imagine a traditional Zen temple in Japan, with its rigorous monastic schedule, its precise rituals, and its deep lineage stretching back through generations. Now, contrast that with a Zen center in a bustling Western city, where practitioners might juggle demanding careers, family responsibilities, and a host of modern anxieties. The question that immediately arises is, how can the profound teachings and practices of the former be authentically transmitted to the latter, without diluting their power or losing their essential nature? You recognize that this is not an easy task, but a continuous process of negotiation. One key aspect of this struggle revolves around lineage and transmission. In traditional Zen, the direct transmission from master to disciple, authenticated through formal recognition, Inka Shimei, is paramount. This ensures the continuity of the Dharma, passed down experientially. In the West, however, the rapid growth of Zen has led to various lineages establishing themselves, sometimes with different interpretations or less rigorous training pathways. You might encounter debates about who is a true master, or whether traditional monastic training is absolutely essential for genuine awakening in a Western context. This tension highlights the challenge of importing a deeply embedded cultural and spiritual structure into a new environment. Another significant point of contention is the balance between form and freedom. Traditional Zen places great emphasis on form, the precise postures in Zazen, the rituals of the sutra chanting, the structure of the Dokusan's private interview with a master. These forms are not seen as rigid rules, but as skillful means to liberate the mind. In the West, with its emphasis on individualism and a skepticism towards external authority, there's often a push to shed these forms, viewing them as unnecessary cultural trappings. You might hear discussions about whether sitting on a cushion is enough, or if engaging in full monastic training is required. The struggle is to discern which forms are essential to the practice itself and which are merely cultural conventions. Then, there's the question of accessibility versus depth. The desire to make Zen available to a wider audience, to meet people where they are, is commendable. However, this can sometimes lead to an oversimplification of teachings or a de-emphasis on the long-term commitment and often challenging self-inquiry that genuine Zen practice demands. Zen's promise of emptiness or no self, for example, can be misunderstood as nihilism or simply a state of relaxation. Rather than a profound liberation from suffering, you might see a proliferation of workshops or books that promise quick spiritual fixes, sometimes at the expense of the sustained effort required for genuine transformation. The role of cultural adaptation is also a crucial part of this struggle. Should Zen in the West remain a faithful replica of its Japanese origins, including the specific language, rituals, and hierarchical structures? Or should it evolve into a uniquely Western Zen, incorporating elements of Western psychology, philosophy, and social contexts? You see a spectrum of approaches, from those who meticulously preserve traditional forms to those who are actively experimenting with new ways of presenting Zen to Western minds. This involves sensitive questions about gender roles, power dynamics, and the integration of Western therapeutic models. Despite these struggles, the very fact that these discussions are happening indicates a maturation of Zen in the West. It's a sign of a living tradition grappling with its own evolution. The authenticity isn't solely defined by adherence to every historical detail, but by the ability of the teachings to continue to produce genuine insight and liberation in new contexts. You understand that this ongoing struggle to balance tradition with adaptation is not a flaw, but a dynamic and necessary part of Zen's journey as it takes root deeply in the Western search for stillness. You have journeyed through the subtle currents of the 19th century, witnessed the pioneering minds, felt the beat of a counterculture, and observed Zen's careful navigation of academia and commercialization. Now, you arrive at the culmination of this historical narrative, your own personal stillness. The story of those 19th century Zen masters and the Westerners they inspired isn't just a historical curiosity. It is a living legacy that directly informs and shapes your own contemporary search for inner peace, presence, and meaning in a perpetually accelerating world. Imagine yourself in your own space, perhaps sitting quietly, or simply going about your daily activities. The very fact that you are contemplating stillness, that you are seeking a deeper connection to the present moment, is a direct echo of the seeds planted centuries ago. You are not an isolated seeker. You are part of a continuous lineage, whether you formally acknowledge it or not. Extending from the quiet monasteries of Japan to the modern mindfulness apps on your phone. The desire to quiet the incessant chatter of the mind, to find clarity amidst chaos, is a timeless human aspiration, now more accessible than ever before thanks to the journey you've just traced. Consider the simple act of mindfulness that has become so pervasive in Western culture. Whether you practice it in a formal meditation session, while drinking your morning coffee, or simply by paying attention to your breath, you are engaging with a principle that is deeply rooted in Zen. That emphasis on being fully present, on observing thoughts and emotions without judgment, on experiencing life as it unfolds moment by moment. This is a direct descendant of Zen's call to Zazen and the cultivation of Satori. You might not call it Zen, but the techniques and the underlying philosophy are undeniably linked. The contemporary interest in detoxing from digital overload, in seeking quieter, more natural environments, or in embracing minimalism in design and lifestyle also reflects this lineage. The aesthetic principles that Okakura Kaku's helped articulate, the simplicity and appreciation for the natural world that captivated early Western observers, continue to resonate. When you choose to step away from screens, to spend time in nature, or to declutter your living space, you are intuitively moving towards a kind of Zen aesthetic that prioritizes space, clarity, and unadorned beauty. You are echoing the very values that captivated the first Westerners to encounter Japanese culture. Furthermore, your own search for authenticity and meaning in a world that often feels superficial or fragmented aligns with the core impulse that drew the Beat generation to Zen. The desire to break free from societal expectations, to question inherited beliefs, and to forge a spiritual path based on direct experience rather than dogma is a persistent thread. Zen, with its radical emphasis on seeing into one's own nature and its rejection of external authority, continues to offer a powerful framework for this personal quest. You are part of a larger conversation about what it means to live a meaningful life. A conversation deeply informed by Zen, the very concept of inner peace itself, so widely sought after today, is deeply interwoven with Zen's promise of liberation from suffering. While the paths to this peace are diverse, Zen offers a direct and experiential route, emphasizing that true tranquility is not found by changing external circumstances, but by transforming one's relationship to them. This profound insight, transmitted by Zen masters for centuries and patiently explained by figures like D.T. Suzuki and Alan Watts, continues to be a guiding light for countless individuals. You realize that your own yearning for inner calm is a manifestation of this enduring search. In recognizing these threads, you understand that your personal search for stillness is not an isolated endeavor. It is a continuation of a profound cross-cultural dialogue that began subtly in the 19th century and blossomed into a global phenomenon. The quiet wisdom of those Zen masters, once distant and inaccessible, has filtered through history, through countless minds and dedicated practices, to finally arrive here, within you. You are the living embodiment of this ongoing search, equipped with tools and insights that were once the exclusive domain of a few dedicated practitioners. The stillness they sought is now, potentially, within your grasp.